Ibrahim Traoré dissolves the election commission. What happens when a leader, who some see as a revolutionary, dismantles the very body meant to guarantee democracy? This isn't just a thought experiment. It's the reality in Burkina Faso, a nation at the heart of the volatile Sahel region. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the world's youngest head of state, has dissolved the country's independent electoral commission. That one move sent shockwaves from West Africa to Washington and Brussels, sparking a fierce global debate. His supporters are calling it a declaration of independence, a crucial step to reclaim national sovereignty from foreign meddling and wasteful spending. They see it as a pivot away from a broken system that's failed to bring security or prosperity, and a move towards a new model of governance, made for and by Africans. His critics, on the other hand, are warning of a much darker agenda. They see a young captain, decked out in military fatigues and revolutionary rhetoric, taking apart every check on his power, piece by piece. They see a dangerous power grab that pushes Burkina Faso down the well-worn path to authoritarianism, cementing military rule and snuffing out the last embers of democratic hope. So, is this a bold step towards a truly sovereign future, or a calculated consolidation of power? Let's break down why this monumental decision was made, what it means for the 22 million people of Burkina Faso, and why the entire continent, and the world, is watching so closely. The announcement was as blunt as it gets. Broadcast on state television, the Minister of Territorial Administration, Emile Zerbo, declared that the Council of Ministers had approved a bill to dissolve the Independent National Electoral Commission, known as the CENI. Its duties, its powers, and its future would all be swallowed by his own ministry, a direct arm of the transitional government. The justification was framed in the language of practicality and patriotism. Zerbo explained that CENI was a budget-consuming institution, costing the state nearly $500 million CFA francs, or about $870,000, in subsidies every year. In a country torn apart by conflict and fighting to provide basic services, it was a luxury the nation could no longer afford. But beyond the price tag, there was a deeper, more ideological reason. The decision was necessary to reinforce sovereign control and cut down on foreign influence in elections. And with that, an institution that had been a cornerstone of Burkina Faso's political world for over 2 decades was gone. So what was this commission, the CENI, that its removal is causing such an uproar? Established in the late 1990s after a political compromise, the Independent National Electoral Commission was meant to be a neutral referee for the democratic process. It was a 15-member body, intentionally made up of people from across society, the ruling party, the opposition, and civil society groups. Its job was to organize, supervise, and validate national elections, to theoretically ensure a level playing field for everyone. The key word, of course, is independent. By putting the machinery of elections outside the government's direct control, the CENI was supposed to build public trust. It was a buffer, a safeguard against the temptation for any regime to rig the vote in its own favor. It was the referee in the political game. Now, the referee has been fired, and the game is about to be officiated by a player on one of the teams. Transferring election oversight to the Ministry of Territorial Administration isn't just shuffling papers. It's a fundamental rewrite of the power structure. A ministry, by definition, is part of the executive branch. It's led by a minister appointed by and accountable to the head of state, in this case, Captain Traoré. This move effectively puts the power of elections into the hands of the junta itself. The group that will now organize future elections, register voters, and announce the results reports directly to the military leadership that took power in a coup. And this didn't happen in a vacuum. It's the latest, and maybe the boldest, move in a series of steps that have solidified the junta's grip on power. Since taking power in September 2022, Captain Traoré's government has suspended the constitution, cracked down on press freedom, and most critically, broken its promise of a swift return to civilian rule. Elections once planned for 2024 have been kicked down the road by 5 years, to July 2029, with a new national charter making the extension official. That same charter allows Captain Traore to stay in office and run in that future presidential election. When you look at it that way, dissolving the CENI seems less like a cost-saving measure and more like strategically removing a major obstacle to indefinite rule. To really get what's happening here, you have to try to understand the man at the center of the storm. At just 36 years old, Captain Ibrahim Traoré is an outlier on a continent where the average leader is over 60. He's a figure full of contradictions. He's a soldier, an artillery captain hardened by years of fighting a brutal jihadist insurgency. But he's also a political phenomenon, a leader whose popularity has exploded not just in Burkina Faso, but across a continent hungry for new leadership. His public image is carefully managed and incredibly powerful. Always in his military fatigues, wearing the iconic red beret, he projects an aura of revolutionary fire and discipline. This isn't by accident. It's a deliberate echo of Burkina Faso's most revered and tragic leader, Thomas Sankara. Sankara, the African Che Guevara, was the revolutionary who took power in 1983, renamed the country from the colonial Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, land of upright people, and in 4 short years, launched a radical agenda of self-sufficiency, women's empowerment, and fierce anti-imperialism before he was assassinated. For many, especially young people, Traoré is seen as the heir to Sankara's unfinished revolution. He speaks the same language of sovereignty, Pan-Africanism, and defiance. He has called Western-style democracy a colonial scam that has failed Africa, and has demanded a revolution before democracy can even be considered. Like Sankara, he's taken aim at the symbols of dependency, most notably by kicking out French troops and diplomats, and cutting military ties with the former colonial power. He's forged new alliances with partners like Russia instead, framing it as a choice necessary for national survival. And like Sankara, who famously cut his own salary and made public servants wear locally made cotton, Traoré has cultivated an image of personal modesty, reportedly staying on his military captain's salary. This powerful mix of revolutionary talk and decisive action has tapped into a deep well of frustration across the Sahel. For many, decades of multi-party democracy have delivered little more than corruption, insecurity, and economic subservience. The jihadist insurgency has only made that disillusionment worse, displacing millions and tearing society apart. In this crisis, Traoré's promise of security, dignity, and real independence is intoxicating. Surveys show that a shocking 66% of Burkinabe now say they accept military rule. When rumors of a coup against Traoré swirled in April 2025, hundreds of thousands reportedly flooded the streets to show their support. He isn't seen as a despot who stole power, but as a patriot who answered his nation's desperate call. The government's official case for dissolving the Electoral Commission stands on 2 powerful pillars: money and sovereignty. To just write these off as propaganda is to misunderstand the deep appeal of Traoré's message, both at home and across the continent. This isn't just a policy change, it's being sold as an act of decolonization. The first argument is simple economics. As Minister Zerbo said, that CENI cost the state about $870,000 a year. To a Westerner, that might sound like a small price for democracy. But in Burkina Faso, where the state is fighting for its life and struggling to build schools and provide clean water, every franc counts. The government argues this money, spent on what it calls a bloated bureaucracy, is better used to equip soldiers, help displaced people, and fund development. It's a powerful, practical argument that hits home for a population that's seen little real benefit from the expensive show of Western-style elections. The question is put bluntly: would you rather have a commission, or a new well in your village? New cars for officials, or armored vehicles for the troops at the front? The second, and more powerful, argument is about sovereignty. Supporters of the move don't see the CENI as independent, but as externally influenced. They argue that these kinds of commissions across Africa are often heavily funded, trained, and watched by Western governments and NGOs. This dependency, they claim, creates a subtle but real form of neocolonial control. The West provides the money, so it sets the rules. It sends observers, who many see not as neutral parties, but as enforcers of a political model that serves foreign interests. Traore's government is essentially saying, we will no longer let our most sacred political process, choosing our leaders, be run on software designed and funded in Paris or Washington. By bringing the process in-house, they argue, they are taking back control and making sure the process is truly Burkinabe. This story of reclaiming sovereignty taps into a much bigger feeling simmering across Africa. There's a growing exhaustion with the one-size-fits-all model of liberal democracy, often seen as a poor fit for the continent's unique problems. The admiration for Traore's decisiveness, even from leaders of more established democracies, reveals this tension. In a time of deep crisis, the slow, messy, and often gridlocked process of democracy can feel like a luxury you can't afford. Traore's actions are seen as a shift from process to results. He famously declared, "We are not in a democracy, we are in a revolution." For his supporters, dissolving the Electoral Commission isn't an anti-democratic act, it's a revolutionary one. A necessary step in clearing out the colonial rubble to build a new foundation for a stronger, more independent nation. But for every argument about sovereignty, there's a counter-argument about suppression. Critics, both in Burkina Faso and around the world, see the dissolution of the CENI in a much darker light. For them, it's not an act of liberation, but the methodical construction of a dictatorship. Their main charge is that this move destroys the whole idea of checks and balances. The entire point of an independent electoral commission is to prevent the abuse of state power. It exists to make sure the party in charge can't use the state's money, its security forces, and its bureaucracy to guarantee its own victory. By handing control of elections to a government ministry, Traore's junta has basically made itself the player, the referee, and the scorekeeper in any future election. Critics say this kills any chance of a free and fair election and shatters the very public trust it's supposed to build. The risk of manipulation and fraud skyrockets when the body running the election answers directly to the candidates in that election. This leads to the second, more damning accusation, that this is a huge step down the road to entrenched authoritarianism. Analysts point to a clear and disturbing pattern. First, the military takes power in a coup, promising to restore security and quickly return to constitutional order. Then, that promise is broken. The transition period gets extended, not by a year or two, but by 5, pushing a return to civilian rule to a distant 2029. Then, the junta pulls out of regional groups like the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, protecting itself from peer pressure and sanctions. At the same time, it cracks down on dissent, silencing critical journalists and opposition figures. In that sequence, getting rid of the Electoral Commission is the logical, terrifying next step. It's the final lock on the door. After seizing military and political power, the junta now grabs control of the one mechanism that could peacefully vote it out of office. It's a move, critics warn, that signals the junta has no plan to ever give up power. It turns the promised transition into a permanent reality. The message is chilling. The military will decide when, how, and if elections are held, and it will be the one counting the votes. This move is seen as a profound betrayal. The initial coup was tolerated, even supported by many, because it was sold as a temporary, emergency measure to save a country on the brink of collapse. The unspoken deal with the Burkinabe people was that the military would stabilize the nation and then step aside. Dissolving the CENI tears up that deal in the most blatant way possible. It suggests the goal was never just about restoring security, but about seizing power for its own sake. It replaces the promise of a democratic future with the certainty of indefinite military rule, turning a supposed savior into a new master. What's happening in Ouagadougou isn't just a local story. It's the epicenter of a political earthquake that is reshaping the entire West African landscape. Burkina Faso sits in the middle of what's now grimly called the coup belt, a stretch of land across the Sahel where military juntas have kicked out civilian governments. Along with its neighbors, Mali and Niger, Burkina Faso has formed a new pact, the Alliance of Sahel States, AES. This is more than a security alliance, it's a new political and ideological bloc. It represents a collective, defiant rejection of the old regional order that was championed by ECOWAS. For decades, ECOWAS pushed for democratic norms and had a policy of sanctioning member states that had coups. It pressured Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso to set quick timetables for returning to civilian rule. But Traore and his allies in Bamako and Niamey have called the bloc's bluff. By pulling out of ECOWAS completely, they've crippled its influence. The sanctions and suspensions that were once feared have lost their bite. The AES countries are now turning inward, building their own sphere of influence, their own economic and security systems, and most importantly, their own rules for governing. The dissolution of Burkina Faso's Electoral Commission is a major test case for this new alliance. It sets a precedent. If Traore can successfully tear down a key democratic institution without any real regional backlash, it gives a playbook to the leaders in Mali and Niger, who face similar pressures to hold elections. It shows that the democratic rules once enforced by ECOWAS are no longer the only game in town. This is creating a deep ideological split across the continent. On one side are the countries still committed, at least on paper, to multi-party democracy and constitutional rule. On the other is this new, assertive bloc that argues for a sovereignty-first, security-led approach. The reaction is no longer just automatic condemnation. The surprising words of admiration from some leaders for Traore's ability to act decisively reveal a growing frustration with the failures of the Western democratic model. It speaks to a continent that is actively debating its own political future. The events in Burkina Faso are forcing a question many governments don't want to ask out loud. If democracy isn't delivering security or development, what's the alternative? Captain Traore is offering one possible, and deeply controversial, answer. Beyond Africa, the reaction has been much clearer. In Western capitals like Paris, Washington, and Brussels, the news was met with predictable alarm. Scrapping an independent electoral commission is a textbook case of democratic backsliding. For Western governments and international groups like the UN, which have poured billions into promoting democratic institutions in Africa, this is a huge blow. From their point of view, an independent body to oversee elections isn't a Western-style luxury, it's a universal requirement for any legitimate democratic process. Without it, you can't have transparency, accountability, or public trust in the results. Diplomats have issued statements of concern, warning that this move undermines Burkina Faso's return to constitutional order and further isolates the country. They fear it will only lead to more instability by closing off peaceful ways for political change. But the hard truth for these Western powers is that their influence in the Sahel is at an all-time low. Traore's government has skillfully neutralized their leverage. By kicking out French forces, Burkina Faso didn't just end a military dependency, it also scored a massive populist win at home. By building new alliances with Russia and others, the junta has created other sources of military and diplomatic support, making it less reliant on the West. Crucially, Traore's anti-imperialist rhetoric has successfully delegitimized Western criticism in the eyes of his people and many across the continent. When Paris or Washington condemns the dissolution of the CENI as undemocratic, the government in Ouagadougou and its supporters just fire back. This is the language of colonial masters who want to keep their control. They skillfully point to what they see as Western hypocrisy, arguing that the same governments now preaching democracy have supported autocrats in Africa when it suited them. This narrative, fair or not, is incredibly effective. It turns what Western powers see as a defense of universal principles into what many Africans hear as an attack on their national sovereignty. The result is that condemnations from abroad, instead of pressuring the junta, often do the opposite. They boost its nationalist credentials and rally more people to its side. We've laid out the event, the man, and the powerful arguments from both sides. But the story in Burkina Faso is far from over. It's a live drama that raises fundamental questions about the future of governance itself. So, what do you think? Is Captain Traoré's decision a necessary act from a sovereign nation fighting for its life, a bold rejection of a failed political model? Or is it a dangerous slide into dictatorship, a power grab dressed up in the language of revolution? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This is a complex issue, and the more perspectives we can share, the better we can all understand it. And if you're finding this analysis valuable, and you believe these conversations are important, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. It's the best way to support what we do and make sure you don't miss our next deep dive into the critical stories shaping our continent and our world. The dissolution of Burkina Faso's Electoral Commission is more than just a line in a government decree. It's a symbol of a nation and a continent at a profound fork in the road. One path leads toward the ideal of institutional democracy. It's paved with principles of checks and balances, multi-party competition, and the rule of law. But in the Sahel, this path has become rocky and dangerous, damaged by corruption, foreign interference, and a failure to protect citizens from violence and poverty. The promise of democracy has rung hollow for millions. The other path is the one Captain Traoré is trying to blaze. It prioritizes sovereignty and security above all else. It promises decisive action, national pride, and freedom from foreign control. It's a path that resonates with a generation tired of broken promises. But it's also a path shrouded in danger, one that could lead to effective but unaccountable rule, where the rights of the individual are sacrificed for the supposed needs of the state, and where power, once taken, is never given back. The choice being made in Ouagadougou today will ripple far beyond its borders. It challenges the very idea of good governance that has dominated global politics for the last 30 years. As Africa continues to chart its own course in the 21st century, the world is watching to see which path will be chosen, the well-trodden, if flawed, road of liberal democracy, or a new, uncharted path forged in the fires of necessity and revolution. The ultimate question for all of us is not just which path Burkina Faso will take, but where that new path truly leads.